Saints GM Mickey Loomis, end of season press conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part 3. If you haven't watched the other 2 parts, go watch them now. We are doing this in succession. We are watching the entire thing, but I'm cutting it up for all of you so you don't have to watch a 4-hour long video. So make sure you go watch those before you watch this. You don't want to watch them out of order, you know what I'm saying? So let's get right into this video.
When you guys grew up, like Trevor Penning not playing, Peyton hurt, Turner being hurt, not playing, like high drafted guys.
Yeah.
How does that affect your roster building and your approach?
Yeah, it affects.
Not good, I can tell you that. Because if you're drafting players highly, like Penning and Turner and Davenport, and you don't get anything from them, they're not viable assets to the roster or not impactful, you are behind the 8 ball because you're wasting draft capital. Sometimes you trade for those draft picks. Sometimes, the investment just isn't there. On the flip side, landing on draft picks can really accelerate a rebuilding phase. Look at the Rams. The Rams were supposed to be rebuilding this year. What happened? They got Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams. All of a sudden, it's like, man, they have a top 10 wide receiver, arguably top 5, and they have a top 10 running back. Like all of a sudden now, they went from, who's going to be the running back? Cooper Kupp. Who else is going to be there for the offense? What are we going to do? To now they are not only not rebuilding, but they look like they're positioned to win. Like going into next season, if you're the Rams, you're thinking, man, we shore up this defense a little bit. This team can compete. This team can have a real chance at getting back to a Super Bowl if these players can play at that level. So it's definitely risk reward to hit on those draft picks. And people do think of it very one or the other. You can kind of just get good players. That's why I tend to want the best available. In my opinion, or the way I look at it, my kind of outlook, my vision of drafting, if you draft the best available and you hit on, because that's probably the safest pick, to just take the best available player. After the course of a couple drafts, hopefully, if you're hitting on a high clip of those, which you should be, because again, they're the safest, then you'll probably have a roster of pretty good players. And then if some of them excel, if some of them develop even further, like we had with Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara and Marshawn Lattimore, then all of a sudden it's like, man, we've got a good, consistent base of talented players across the board, and we have a couple of shining players. Yeah, every once in a while, a best available is not going to work out, sure. But if you go for this high risk, high reward, and you try and constantly find the diamonds in the rough, I feel like you can get burned a whole lot more.
Listen, you can't, these injuries are I don't want to say coincidental, that's the wrong word, but they're not controllable generally, They happen. And
another thing I feel like the Saints do with draft picks is we have not been drafting impact players, like impact positions. We're drafting a lot of, a guard here or a center here or like a third defensive back here or maybe like a rotational defensive tackle here. We're not drafting like, hey, this guy, we need this guy to come in and get 10 sacks. Hey, we need this guy to catch blank amount of passes. Hey, we're going to give this guy a ton of carries. Hey, this guy is going to be a focal point of the offense. We're not drafting those kind of players. We're almost drafting with the idea that these guys will be rotational players. Davenport, and Turner, and even Penning, and even like the Alontae Taylor. We weren't drafting him, and I might be wrong, but we're not drafting him to be a lockdown number one, go cover the best guy cornerback like the Jets did with Sauce. And I understand that it's different. They were drafted in different areas, but if you're constantly drafting players with the idea of, well, we're basically drafting role players everywhere, every year. And so the ceiling for these role players just isn't that high, isn't that impactful. And then if you miss on the role players, it's even worse.
Look, yeah, I hate when it happens. And Peyton, for example, was doing some really good things and got hurt again, so that's tough. But it's not like he's trying to get hurt. Trevor Penning's had a couple injuries that have slowed their development. And so that's different than misevaluating the talent. So I don't know how to answer it otherwise.
Is Trevor like at a point where you gotta have a contingency plan maybe going forward because it is maybe a little uncertain, like that confidence level?
Well, we have a contingency. Excuse me. There's that cough. I mean, we have to have a contingency plan for everything. So
yeah, I agree there.
Injuries are indiscriminate.
Mickey, when you look at like last offseason, said, okay, we got to play better against the run. You have to be disappointed in that, where you're thinking your interior defensive line, David Onyemata, Lee, Shaitel, and everything. Seems like we took a step back in that regard. We're basically giving up 4.5 yards a run, and obviously not running the ball as well as we wanted to. That needed to be flipped, as far as what we give up for and what we actually averaging. So how was your disappointment with us actually being able to stop the run consistently?
Yeah, I think you go into any season wanting to stop the run first, right, and then pass second generally.
I would say that's flipped. I think in the NFL now, I think you definitely want to be able to stop the pass. You want to be able to get after the quarterback, all that stuff, and then stop the run. The game's just changing. It is.
By the same token, look, we wanted to improve in takeaways, right? In our takeaway turnover ratio, we did that. We weren't as good in the red zone on either side of the ball as we've been in the past, and yet I felt like, man, back half of the season, we really improved in that area.
Yeah, Carr was really good in the red zone the last 5 or 6 games and really bad in the red zone to start the season.
Pretty significantly. So there's improvements that happened during the season, although the end result, the end statistic may not be where you want to be. So, we're looking at all those areas and saying, okay, what did we do right? Why did we do that? And how can we improve on it? And then we're looking at the things that we didn't do well that we have to improve on if we expect to get the record and the results that we want. It's a good question, though. We've got to look at every one of those single areas and say, we weren't as good as we expected to be. Why?
What did you make of Michael Thomas this season?
Excuse me?
What did you make of Michael Thomas this season?
Question was, what did you make of Michael Thomas this season? I thought Thomas was really good when he was when he was healthy, when they threw him the ball. I think he was what we needed. We needed kind of a physical wide receiver to be the complement to Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. I think Thomas was doing that. He made some incredibly difficult, incredibly physical catches. I was very impressed. I think Carr probably could have leaned on him more. I think the offense could have ran through him more, especially on some 3rd and 5s, 3rd and 6s. His ability to catch balls in traffic, those intermediate routes, slants, and whatever that he's good at doing. The Saints got away from throwing the ball in the middle of the field earlier in the season, and that's where he likes to eat. So that wasn't good too. And then of course he gets hurt. But I think he's probably moving on to greener pastures. If he can stay healthy, he can be really good. Another draft note. So one of the good examples of kind of how I look at drafting impact players and all that is what the Bengals had to decide between Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell. A lot of people, a lot of former GMs, a lot of front office execs in the media were saying you have to take Penei Sewell because you have to protect Joe Burrow. And the Bengals offensive line was a mess. Burrow was coming off an injury. It seemed like it made a lot of sense. Take the best offensive lineman, shore up the O-line. Bengals instead went with the impactful position, and they took Jamar Chase. And I think they assumed we can find an offensive lineman to do the job in free agency. We can't find a Jamar Chase. Think about how impactful, or think about how good Penei Sewell would have had to be as impactful on the overall Bengals season and how they play as Jamar Chase was. They drafted Jamar Chase with the idea of you are going to be a dominant number 1 wide receiver. That's what you're going to do. You're not going to be used on 3rd downs. You're not going to only be used on, 1st and long. You're not only going to be used a little bit. We're going to target you a lot. We're going to run the offense through you. And look what happened. So that's how I kind of look at it, where you have to draft players to be dominant. You have to draft impact positions and impact players to come in there, do a job, dominate, be good. Like right now, the Saints are looking at whatever the 14th pick. The Saints need offensive line help. Taking a guard from Indiana who maybe can develop into a role player, he can maybe get some snaps, he can maybe, get some game time this year. Doing that is how impactful is that? Getting a Jared Verse or Keon Coleman and saying, hey, guess what, Jared Verse, we need you to get 12 sacks. We need you to be the defensive rookie of the year. We are getting you to come in here and dominate. I'm always going with the Keon Coleman, Jared Verse, where they're coming in, They're given a task to go dominate. We need them to be at the highest possible level. We're drafting them to be at the highest possible level. We're not drafting them to be a rotational player. I think Brian Brzee was kind of like that this year, where he was asked to be serviceable. I believe that's kind of what it looked like. And if you're drafting first rounders to be serviceable, all of a sudden you just have a bunch of serviceable players. How good is your team really?
Look, I thought he was doing well and really excited about where he was, and then look, we had another injury. It's really difficult for us and for Mike to have to go through that. He's such a great competitor, so wants to win so badly, wants to be out there so badly, and for him to get hurt again was difficult.
With that being said, it seemed like the fans were led to believe, at least the last maybe couple of games, that Marshawn Lattimore and Michael Thomas would have been available.
Yeah. Hey,
I don't think Thomas was ever available. And then Lattimore was on IR. I don't think he was available either. So I'm not sure Hebert was letting her rip, but I never assumed they were medically cleared to return.
no, if they were available, they would have played.
I know Dennis was asked this question. It's been a long time since we heard like a prominent player booed at home in the Superdome. Do you think what Derek went through was a little too much from the fans?
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever too much. I think the fans are what they are. The fans, as long as it's not outrageous, as long as they're not throwing glass bottles on the field or anything, like as long as they're staying within their means, booing and all that is, fine. I think Derek was a bit of a scapegoat. I think he had a $150 million price tag. He's a franchise quarterback. Saints were struggling. Fans were unhappy with how the entire organization was being run. So it comes down to the head coach and the quarterback. That happens. Hey, you want to be the quarterback? You want to be the head coach? You want to be the CEO of a business? That's just how it works. When things aren't going well, you're going to hear about it. They weren't going to boo, Carl Granderson. They weren't going to boo Pete Werner. You boo the franchise quarterback. And I really do think it makes Carr better. I gained a lot of respect for Carr, how he went through that, how he kind of went through the adversity, how he could have shut it down. Think about it. He got paid $150 million, whatever he ends up, after the contract and all that stuff, what he actually is paid, whatever. But he got paid a ton of money. He could have said, you know what, F these fans, screw this city, I don't care, whatever, I'm collecting a check, I don't care at all about this. Other players could have said, man, I'm out of here, son. I got 10 more games left, and then I'm out of my contract, I'm requesting a trade, whatever. But the team seemed to say, okay, we hear you, we're with you. And the team seemed to collectively decide, we have to do better, we have to be better. And they were better. And I think Carr got a lot of respect from the city. I think he gained a lot of new fans here with how he dealt with the adversity and how he looked and improved the remainder of the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of the quarterback position, though, right?
Yes.
You get more credit than you probably deserve, and you get more blame. It's what I said at the beginning, is that the easy and lazy thing to do with results is to blame the coach or the quarterback. Yeah, that's what fans do. That's what the media does. That's what I hear ex-players doing it. So, and they don't really know,
Dennis said he thought you guys were close to getting back to wherever you wanted to go. Do you concur?
Well,
I think we're close. I really do. I mean, right now we're in a weak division. It's not an easy division by any means, especially if the Falcons get Bill Belichick and a better quarterback or whatever. The Bucs just beat the Eagles, so it's a competitive division, but I think it's weaker as far as we don't have a lot of ground to make up. We're not trying to chase Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. We're not trying to chase the Ravens. We're not trying to chase the 49ers. We're already average. We just need to get to above average. I think we have the roster to be above average. If we get the right offensive coordinator and we nail the offensive coordinator hire, I think we can make a dramatic jump. And I think we can take that step to being above average to great. We have a tough schedule. We play a lot of good teams coming up. So I don't think we're going to win 12 games, 13 games or anything like that. But I think we can be a much better team. I think we can make a run at the division, make a run at double-digit wins, and trying to get into the playoffs. So we're right there. But it all starts with the OC. It all starts with landing that hire. If we mess that up, if we bring in the wrong guy, or we bring in a system or whatever that doesn't fit Carr and doesn't fit the players, and then we won't succeed.
Well, I think close as a I think we have the potential to be a really good team. Now, I thought that coming into the season as well, but there's some things that we have to do collectively and individually to get there, and actions are going to speak a lot louder than any words. So we'll see.
I think anytime you have a problem, whether it's in sports or life or whatever, you always want the problem to be like very linear in how to solve it. You don't want a problem where you're like, hands up, I don't know what's wrong. Those are the worst, because then you don't know where to start, you don't know what to fix, you have no goal, you have no roadmap to your goal. The Saints do have a roadmap. The Saints just have to be better in certain areas. Those certain areas are basically every area. They have to be able to run the football. That starts, boom, number one. We were terrible running the football. Okay. Roadmap. Let's shore up the offensive line. Let's try and figure out bringing an offensive coordinator who can shore up the run game. Okay, boom, there. Get a lot out of Derek Carr. Same thing. Get the offensive coordinator to get the most out of Carr. Defensively, we got to be better stopping the run. Okay, let's look into free agency to try and shore up the defensive line. Let's try and get some people in there who can stop the run. Hey, Dennis Allen, you have to focus on this. Here's your roadmap. If we execute those individual roadmaps, we certainly have the roster to win. We certainly have the roster to compete. But it all starts with figuring out what the problem is. Saints this year, I thought they could. I mean, I bet, everyone knows I bet them a lot on them to win more than 9.5 games. I thought they could compete. Well, it didn't help that we didn't run the ball well, stop the run. We didn't score, especially early on in the season. We didn't move the ball well earlier on in the season. We started slow. We were just doing a lot of stuff wrong. So the challenge is pretty obvious for the Saints. What we have to do to be successful is right there. It's not like we have all this stuff and all these players, and it's not like we have all these great numbers and great stats, and we're looking around like, why didn't we win? We're looking around like, man, we had the number 5 pass defense and the number 3 run defense. Why didn't we dominate? Luckily we can look. Everything's right there for us. Now we just got to go out and fix it. That's the hard part for Mickey. But if we can get the right people in place, a la this OC, I think we'll be fine.
How this offseason goes. But yes, I'm excited about the potential of our team. But we've got to do it. I mean, we've got to perform.
Yeah, there you go.
Are there schematic things you've been impressed by during his tenure here in terms of this past season?
Yeah.
Who? Dennis? Schematics? Get out of here.
A fantastic defensive coach. Fantastic.
I agree with that.
Representative again today, saying you have some ground to make up in the cap. You kind of said in years past you want to maybe look at how you're doing that. And is there going to need to be a little bit of a change in how you operate just with the management of it and with some different structures and board years and stuff, just in terms of like dead cap money you guys are carrying and all that?
I don't know that change is the right word. We just got to be conscious of, making up some ground in the next few years, and there's different ways to do that. So
yeah, the cap is complicated. I think we do a good job of managing it and juggling it. As long as we are juggling the different buckets, it is what it is. Y'all know I'm not a big fan of cap conversations because it's one of those words that you can always say, we're this under the cap, the cap, it's whatever. But really, it doesn't matter. Like, really, teams can always find money. You can always do stuff. It's all just monopoly money anyways. So cap conversation is wasted conversation.
And I've said this to you guys before. Sometimes you have to look beyond the numbers, and you have to look.
Yeah.
Okay, how many guys are under contract? What's the roster? What are your core players? There's lots of different things to look at You know, if you're $50 million over the cap and you have 30 players under contract, that's different than being $50 million over the cap and having 70 players under contract.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of different variables.
With Dennis, sorry if this is dumb, but you know, you listed off Belichick and the records there, their first few seasons. Does his Oakland experience just not matter at all? Because it would be technically, if you throw that in, it would be year 5 rather than the first few years.
Yeah, it matters. You know, it matters. You know, where you're at matters.
So we covered this in the first video. They're referencing Loomis compared Dennis Allen to Bill Belichick and Chuck Noll and Tom Landry and Bill Walsh and I think Moses or someone else. But go back in the first video. We break this down. I absolutely just annihilate this argument. So if you want to see that in all of its glory, go back into part 1.
There's the experience. Look, I think having any head coaching experience is valuable. You learn a lot of things, you know, your first time around. Again, you have to look beyond just the record. You know, what was the circumstances when he was in Oakland? You know, they basically were way over the cap. They had to tear down the team. You know, the quarterback situation. There was a lot of variables there that, and he was given a short amount of time. So you got to look at all those variables.
Have you ever felt the need to have a meeting with the entire team at the end of the season like you did this year? Has that ever happened before?
Pretty good question. You know, I don't know the answer to that. Mickey addressed the team apparently after the Falcons game, kind of talked about culture, talked about all that stuff. So the question here is, has he ever done that before?
I've had meetings with the team before. It's been a while. But I felt like there were some things that needed to be said to the players. Just like I think there's things that need to be said to the coaching staff and to our football operations staff, and that's going to be said, you know. Again, I think maybe we've gotten a little too comfortable over the last few years, and so I want to make it uncomfortable.
No problem with that. You know, I think Mickey, he is right that the culture and the standard has slipped. So, hey, guys, you know, in any walk of life, you got to kind of get whoever back to where the culture and all that should be.
Mickey, how does that marry with, I mean, using that expression, we've gotten too comfortable, and also you guys made it very clear you didn't think the culture needed to change. You know, kept most of the staff after Sean left. Like, you know, what's the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, well,
that is my biggest question with the whole culture conversation. On one hand, we have Mickey and players and whoever else saying the culture is kind of bad, the culture's eroded a little bit, the standards have slipped a little bit. How can that all be true? But you don't have to change the coaches. You don't have to change the leadership. You don't have to make any changes. How can you expect the culture and the standards that have slipped to get better if the people who have allowed them to slip, whether that's coaches or players, if the people who have allowed them to slip, because you have accepted that that's confirmed. You've said they've slipped. Okay, so let's pretend that's a universal truth. If that's a universal truth and they've slipped, how can you also say the right people are here to make sure they don't slip? They just let them slip. So this part has confused me too, and this is why I thought whenever Mickey was saying, you know, the culture has slipped, the standards have slipped, players are voicing their just, you know, disagreements and stuff. I was thinking, okay, well, Allen's gone. I mean, you can't keep a coach when you're talking about how the culture and the standards and stuff have fallen apart.
You know, you're commingling terms. Cultures, you know, culture means a lot of things to a lot of different people. We've got great people in the building, so I want to make that really clear. We got really good guys, great representatives of the organization, hardworking. There's a lot of really good things, but there's some other things that I felt like, you know, we need to clean up and that we've, you know, let I don't want to say slide. That's not the right word, but a few things that kind of had deteriorated over the last 4 or 5 years that, you know, kind of core beliefs. And again, that's my.
So, I mean, the only thing I can think of is like, so we've heard about, you know, the players not using their tablets to study or log the hours they're supposed to or doing all that stuff. All I can think of is that the players who were doing that have dropped the culture and dropped the standards, were under the positional coaches who were fired. And Mickey may pretty much thinking like, okay, this is me fixing that. Whereas we look at culture as this big picture, this like team thing where Dennis Allen is setting the culture, but maybe he's looking more granular. Because I mean, it really just doesn't make sense where, you know, if you go to a restaurant and you're saying, man, this restaurant has really gotten bad. The food has gotten terrible. The culture of this restaurant is disgusting. The standards are gone, but the general manager is doing a great job. So, okay, well, those both can't, hold on a second. You know, how can those two, so maybe he's thinking much more granular, much more like blank wide receiver was not looking, doing his tablet stuff. Blank wide receiver wasn't doing this. Thus, we fired the wide receiver coach to try and get the positional culture back. You know, maybe he's thinking on that level. I'm just guessing.
My responsibility. That's why I spoke to the players. And look, the DA spoke to the players as well. So it's not anything different in terms of what the head coach does.
What was last week? I know assistant coaches were away from the building. Was it you and Dennis and some other core decision makers kind of evaluating what are the major changes we want to focus on first, and offense came away as one of those?
Well, look, last week is the first thing. I don't think you ever make really good decisions in the aftermath of a season when it's still emotional, right?
Yeah, true. I agree.
So that's, we're giving the staff off, and everybody was really off the good part of last week. But it gives Dennis a chance to, give some thoughts, and me, and it wasn't anything formal.
The main takeaway, obviously, you said it'll bear on the results, or we'll see what happens. I mean, since the offensive changes, I mean, does it feel like that is kind of one of the major things you've identified that could change the fortunes of this team?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. That's what made the changes.
One game this season that
Mickey getting a little agitated with some of these questions. Mickey getting a little defensive.
back and like maybe regret or think like that game could have changed the course of the season if you think back.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of games. I mean, a lot of games. The Saints were basically one game away from winning the division, going into the playoffs, and changing whatever. The games that stick out to me are Minnesota, Green Bay, and Atlanta. Well, I guess and Tampa at home. Atlanta on the road, Tampa at home, Minnesota, and Green Bay. And I say those because Atlanta wanted to get beat that game on the road. Like, they didn't do anything, and we kicked 6 field goals. If we just had any kind of a pulse offensively, we win that game. Tampa, you're at home, and you get rolled by Tampa. And it's not like they just match up better. I mean, we saw what we did to them on the road. So to me, I hate whenever we dominate a team on the road and lose at home, because if you dominate them on the road, you should at least be able to keep it close at home. And we got dog walked. Minnesota, frustrating because it's Josh Dobbs. At the time, I was saying Josh Dobbs is a journeyman, whatever, D- quarterback. We made him look like Cam Newton. 2 weeks later, he isn't in the league. All right? They had basically a playoff game against the Packers, and they went with Jaron Hall and Nick Mullins. Josh Dobbs wasn't even in the stadium, right? But he looked that good against us, and the game was never close. And then Green Bay, obviously, because we blew it. Obviously, we're up, whatever it was, 17-0, and then we give up 18 unanswered points. Horrible game. Any of those games flip, or if all of the games flip, very different season.
Yeah, there was a few things that happened that fourth quarter that were out of our control that I didn't like.
Let's talk about the penalty.
Change the outcome of that game. But there's always things. There's always a play here, a play there. Look, it's a one game, right? And changes the entire course and narrative of the season.
When that's happening at the time, do you think that like if
Yeah,
that
I do because I've experienced it before.
Right. I don't know if it,
Yeah, I mean, how can you not? You let that kind of stuff slip in the NFL where it's so competitive. You let a game get away from you, or you let a couple games get away from you. It's like, man, especially divisional games. Like, we let the Tampa at home, Tampa in the Dome, and the Falcons on the road. You lose those games, you got to be thinking like, man, these are not the games to let slip. Same with like Green Bay. You blow that lead. You got to think everything's pretty tight. You can't just blow games. If you those kind of coin flip games like that, like, I don't care what team you are. If you lose a bunch of them, that certainly is going to come back to haunt you.
Not early in the season, you think, oh, this
Like,
will come back.
I said to someone, you know, the last week we had to have certain things happen for us to get in the playoffs, right? We handled our part. But I've been in that situation in my career probably 4 or 5 times, and not one time has it ever happened like you wanted it to happen, right? So I hate getting to the point where you're relying on someone else to you know, do their job for you or do our job for us. So we can't put ourselves in that situation.
No, we cannot.
That's on us.
So when you watch Tampa do what they did in the playoffs, does that add to another element of it, or emotions?
Yes. They played a great game and have become a good football team. They've won a lot of games in the last 6-7 weeks. It's a credit to them and a credit to their coaching staff and players.
Keep interrupting, sorry. When you say too comfortable and make it uncomfortable, when you have like a body of work like you do that you can mine the history, is that kind of like maybe in 08 when Garrett Gibbs left and Brett Williams got here, in 13 when like Lance and Roman, is that kind of what you're alluding to, that maybe a little bit of a change, or is that just a parallel that I just kind of made up?
No, I think that's, there's some similarities there. Yeah.
This is definitely a change. Like bringing in this OC with a new vision, new all that stuff. This is definitely a time to shake things up, to get new life into this, new eyes, new vision, new voice. Sometimes in any franchise, sometimes having the same voice, the same people, the same ideals, the same rah-rah speech, all that stuff, sometimes it's just, you just have to have that change.
What's the old thing about keep doing the same things? The definition of insanity, right? So, we got to do things a little differently.
He left out like the most important part of the quote. If you do the same things and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. Doing the same things, I think, is just the definition of like a routine. So, Mickey might want to sharpen up his quotes before the next press conference.
If we expect a different result.
Mickey, I've got
there you
a
go.
little
You
more
got
of a lead question.
There you go.
Officiating has been in the headlines a lot this year. I'm just wondering.
I'm trying not to talk about officiating, at least cryptically.
One of the most high-profile gaffes in recent history.
I'm sorry, say that again.
From your experience as someone who was a victim
Yes.
of basically one of the most high-profile mistakes, admitted mistakes. Where would you say generally, this is not about specific calls this year against your team or anything like that, but how would you say you feel generally about the evolution of officiating since then to now?
Horrible. The officiating, man, this is another video for a different day, but the officiating in the NFL and sports across the board is really bad. And the reason for that is what I alluded to in a lot of other videos, is that there's so much more information. Think about it 20 years ago. If an official makes a bad call, the only thing you got to go on is the replay they show you on that broadcast. You don't see the replay in hyper slow motion, in 4K, in whatever, a million different ways. If there's a bad call in a game, there's video of it from multiple angles on Twitter, on Instagram, being broken down by different analysts, by different officials. The rule itself is shown on the screen. Everything is so much more in your face. So when you have a bad call, it's so much more like, this is definitely a bad call. It's not like, he might have missed it, or I didn't really see it, so, it is what it is. Now it's like, how can you blow that? How can you mess it up? What I don't understand about the NFL is that for a long time, the NFL officials, and they might be part-time or they might still be part-time employees. They're not like tried and true professional NFL referees. Somebody double check that. For a long time there, up until a couple of years ago, they were part-timers. This is the NFL. This is multi-billion-dollar industry. They took a day of the week from God. Okay, they are the most powerful entity in the United States. How does the NFL not have professional level, hyper-trained, basically Navy SEALs of officiating? Oh, and what I don't understand is how the officials cannot be reviewed, cannot be judged. We don't know who the officials are. We don't know their names. We don't know their score. There isn't a statistic for them. How many calls are they missing? Why are they missing these calls? Who's being held accountable? Can an official be fired? Have we ever heard of an official being removed middle of the season for blowing a call? No, we don't hear any of that stuff. So they have to change and evolve with how they do officiating. I've also never understood why, we have like the chain gang. We have microchips in every football. We've got cameras at every angle, but we have to have a couple of 84-year-olds holding 2 sticks and some chains waddle out into the field to try and get the marker. Like, why are we not using I have to watch 80,000 AWS, NFL, AI analytic commercials during a broadcast. Why don't we use some of that technology to make sure we're getting the correct spots and the correct calls? I don't think we need to go to where it's all robot officials, where everything is exactly hyper correct to the millimeter, but we shouldn't be blowing defensive pass interference calls like that, what happened against the Saints. We shouldn't be blowing calls like what happened with the Detroit Lions and Dallas Cowboys. We do have to take most of the human error element out when it comes to officiating. I think the more that the lens is on games, as far as broadcast, streams, commentary, replay, Twitter, social media, whatever, the more that that's evolving, the more scrutiny the officials are going to be under. So I think it's in a terrible place.
Now, is it disappointing, or did you hope there would have been more changes designed to minimize errors or minimize the headlines?
Oh, man. I'm not going to comment on that, Brett. I'd like to, but, I have some thoughts, and I've shared those with the league, and, it's their responsibility above my pay grade.
How critical do you think it is this year to get it finally fixed and get back to the playoffs?
Yeah,
What a question. How important do you think it is to get things fixed and get back to the playoffs? I would say it's hyper imperative. It is the basis of which we shall be evaluated. It is the very basis of what will be determined as success or failure. It is the most important possible thing.
I think every year is important to get back to the playoffs. That's the standard. That's the first standard, right, of a successful season, make the playoffs. And so if you don't make the playoffs, then I don't think you can say you've had a...
I'm pretty close. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty close to just basically being the GM. I mean, the answers that
Successful season. So we didn't have a successful season this year.
We did not.
We want to have a successful season next year. So, and we'll evaluate next season when next season's here.
Yeah.
You have a window, as you were kind of talking about earlier. Do you guys internally see like that? You mentioned like player contracts and like 3-year gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you guys view kind of a window for how this roster is built as well, or taking advantage of a window?
Well, I think you have to...
The honest answer is yes, of course. You have to have expectations, and those expectations are based on the window and the contracts and the players you have in the house. His answer, he can't say that publicly, but it is obvious, right? Like, of course, you have expectations that only are there because of the players, because of who's there and who's not. So every team has windows, and some are larger and smaller depending on the player, but like the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback. As long as he's the quarterback, the window's open. Other teams, they might not have a quarterback, they may not have a coach, or they may be in flux, like the Falcons. The Falcons right now, they don't have a window. They don't have a head coach. They don't have a quarterback. Now, if they get Bill Belichick, all of a sudden the window creeps open. If they find a quarterback, all of a sudden, now they got a window. So
I probably wouldn't describe it like that. I think you have to assess your team and have realistic expectations. But I think making the playoffs is a realistic expectation. I've said that was a realistic expectation this year. And so we're close, but not close enough.
I apologize. I had a really bad tooth, and I have a dentist appointment.
You want me to pull it for you?
When I leave, it's going to be clunky as hell, and I apologize because I have to.
Good, Mike.
With Joel Thomas taking or headed to the Giants, first, was that a spot running back coach that y'all were considering making a change at already? And also, just what are the Giants getting?
That was Joel's decision to, pursue that, and you have to ask him about the reasons behind that. But Joel's a fantastic coach, did a fantastic job. Yeah.
You could have blocked it though, was it just?
No, I don't feel that's fair to do. Look, when someone's been here for a good period of time and done a great job, they have the right to, self-determination. And so, generally speaking, that's how we approach it.
Mickey, have you talked with Dennis about this, that you can watch a number of games, how you see poor tackling? But then how do you practice tackling, or just you see throughout the league?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot this year about how the tackling thing is just like, guys, there's way bigger problems. These are professionals. I would hope they're tackling. I would hope they're practicing tackling. There's so many other things happening during the game. To highlight tackling, to me, is the same as highlighting the effort and highlighting playing hard, highlighting picking up your teammate. Like, those are just things that are expected. Those are things that are inherent. They're very up and down. It's hard to quantify. They're just bigger fish to fry moving forward than tackling.
Look, that's a good question. I think that's one of the things that we need to assess is how are we approaching the offseason? How are we approaching training camp? How are we approaching the preseason games? Because I felt like we got off to a really slow start in a number of those fundamental areas. And so is that a result of the way we're practicing? Is that a result of the way we play the preseason games? And look, it's hardest on your O-line, D-line, right? It's hardest on them because it's a contact sport in pads. And so what's the right amount of practice and preparation?
I think that part is a good answer, to where it's like, if you hyper focus on tackling, it's the same as like catching or hitting the hole or whatever. It's like, those are things that these guys should be doing. They're there because we know they can do those things. You don't draft a wide receiver. You don't sign a linebacker who can't tackle or who can't catch, right? The bigger question is, how are we preparing? We know these players can do these things. So the answer can't be they don't know how to tackle. The answer has to be, what's the preparation? What's leading up to the game? What's the preseason look like? What is the training camp? What's all going into this? So Mickey is looking at this through the right lens, and that is why the whole season, I was saying, wasting your breath on form tackling is pointless. Talk about the actual methods, not about the actual activity.
For those situations, same thing with tackling. We don't do a lot of tackling in training camp or certainly in the preseason if you're not playing a lot. So these are all the things. Look, I was telling someone. When I was in Seattle in 1983, I think we had 60 3-hour padded practices for training camp, something like that. Bobby, you experienced it. Now we have 17, and none of them are 3 hours. And so, look, it's a different amount of preparation. I'm not saying that was right to do it that way, but the preparation time is just different, and so we have to adjust to that. And I think that's really hard thing about coaching. In this era of football is that do we have the right amount of time to get those fundamentals squared away and ready to go week one of the regular season?
It's also part of the coaching too, where it's like, okay, look, if your whole system is built on having that old school style of training, lead up, camp, whatever, can you evolve to get the same message across, to get the same fundamentals, as Mickey said, across in this new style? Because it ain't going back to that. We're not going back to 2 days, 60-hour or 63-hour practices or whatever. So can you adapt? And that's what makes a good coach. That's what makes a good organization, is finding those new voices, new ideals, innovating and evolving.
And look, I don't have the answers for it. I'm not a coach, so that's a coach's responsibility, but it's something that we need to talk about and examine. Are we preparing the right way, relative to the rules that exist?
Does that examination include potentially out of town again for training camp, like Greenbrier or something like that?
Sure, yeah. All of it's open for discussion. Yes.
Mickey, I think as of right now, you only have 2 picks in the first 4 rounds, maybe a couple of picks coming your way. Is that an area maybe where you seek to add to that pool just to kind of help with the financial flexibility of the roster?
So I guess the question is, do you seek to add draft picks?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, because look, when you have a young player on a rookie contract, that's a different cost and cap than having a veteran player, so that it becomes part of the elements. But look, we want to put the best roster together that we can put together. And
Yeah, agree.
And I always believe, you can acquire players in all three forms, really: free agents, draft picks, trades. And so we're going to look at all those areas. And
Perfect.
if we can,
Good answer. Yes.
improve our roster, that's what we'll do.
Mickey, along the same lines as the question about practice and being able to practice, full contact and things like that. Cam Jordan talked the other day about the changes in the technology around the league and how, the convenience of being able to study film at home, but then the complications that come with that as well.
Right.
How would you measure sort of the technological advances of the league and balancing the conveniences, but also some of the maybe problematic things that can
I think that's
Every walk of life. I mean, we're seeing that in normal jobs. We're seeing that in sports. We're seeing that in everything. Where as convenience ramps up, as ease ramps up, some of the other problems pop up, right? Like work from home. Work from home is very similar to this. It's literally what they're talking about. Convenient, ease, all that stuff, really high. But there's other problems with work from home where that you have to deal with as well. It's just the facts of life. The goal here for an organization, whether it's a business or a team or whatever, don't buck change. Don't be stagnant. Don't be stubborn just because you're afraid of change, you don't believe in it, whatever. Figure out how to harness it. And that's what the Saints have to do. They have to figure out how to harness these new technologies, how to use them to their advantage. Bill Belichick was famous for harnessing the technologies, harnessing the data, harnessing the information, and he was a million years ahead of the rest of the NFL when it came to harnessing the power of all of that. And then look what happened. The Patriots blew everyone else away for more than a decade of their dominance. Same, we've seen it in other sports too. The Warriors, it wasn't technology, but the Warriors went light years ahead of everyone else with how much they started shooting threes and how fast they were playing, and 3 is greater than 2 and all that stuff. The rest of the league caught up a few years later, and now that's the standard. Okay, if a team would have said no, we're not shooting threes, we're posting up, big man down low, get in the paint, back down the defender, 2 points. If that's what they would have stuck with, they've been the worst team in the NBA. So it is an important marriage of somehow keeping the ideals, keeping the culture, keeping all that the same, but figuring out how the new technology and all that marries in.
part of the equation, is that look, when somebody wins a championship, right? One of the very first things you always hear is, "Man, we had great chemistry on our team. We loved each other. We played for each other." There's a trust and a relationship, right? And yet today we have, and we're all guilty of it, particularly young people. You're at dinner and they're on their cell phone, right? They're texting. They're not conversing and developing that relationship. And so I think that we have to be conscious of that. It's hard to develop chemistry and trust if you don't know your teammates well. And so, in 15 years ago or 20 years ago, there'd be a group of guys in the position meeting room watching film together after practice, right? Bobby, I'm sure you did that with your receivers and some the other guys on your team, and you're conversing, you're watching the tape, you're watching your opponent, you're talking about it, you're sharing, information. And today, they go home with their iPad a lot of times and do that same study. So they're putting in work and effort, but it's just not the same. And so that's one of the challenges.
It is different, no doubt about it. And those examples he gave is very different. It is different to watch the game and study the game with your team versus doing it on your couch with your kids running around and making dinner or whatever else you're doing. No doubt about that. So you got to somehow be able to get the same positives through the new iterations of technology.
Challenges today, and so we have to, have a right balance between the technology and then developing the relationships and trust.
Do you have, as an organization, the ability to forgive the question of just thinking about it? The ability to maybe mandate certain things?
Not really.
Well,
everything's voluntary these days.
Yeah, that's kind of out. I mean, the idea of like mandatory whatever, really drilling down the power. The players have more power than ever. So yeah, I mean that whole concept is a step backwards. That whole concept is, same in the workplace. It's much harder to demand employees work 8 hours a day, lunch break from noon to 1, 5 days a week, whatever. There's more power now being handed over to the employee, whether it's a NFL player or someone in a bank, So yeah, mandates and stuff like that are probably not coming back.
But here's what's mandatory is a commitment to winning.
Yeah.
Right?
Good. Yeah.
That's what's mandatory.
Yes.
I was kind of curious about the same things he was asking. So it's basically asking the players to do extra, I guess. So you can't say you have to comment and do extra film study because they've already had their film study in their normal meetings, right?
Yeah.
So does that fall to like the team captains to organize that, or even leaders of the specific groups or whatnot? Like, is that entirely a player-driven thing?
Well, I think what's going to end up happening is like you're going to end up swinging back to the voluntary becomes the mandatory, where a team captain might say, all right, look, all the linebackers are going to be watching film at the facility from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on blank day. Be there if you don't want to. And the people who aren't there have to know it's a disadvantage. It's not positive that they're not there. And so all of a sudden it becomes kind of this alluded to mandatory situation. So, that's probably how it's handled right now. Is it the best way to do it? I don't know, but it is a juggling act.
I think it's everybody. It's what do you want out of your career? What do you want as a player, as a coach? Me, what do we want out of this? And it's what I said before, right? We all raise our hand when we say we want to win. And we all raise our hand and say we'll do whatever it takes to win. But then you have to do it, right? And a lot of these things that you're talking about, you have to do if you want to have a successful team. And so, yeah.
I mean, that's part of it too, where in every walk of life, if you want to build this perfect, easy, convenient, whatever, schedule and lifestyle and all of that and do that, okay. But it's going to be difficult to push to that level of excellence that Loomis is talking about unless you do some things you don't want to do. Unless you do things, the definition of discipline is doing what you're supposed to do when you don't feel like it, right? So it's the same as anything. I mean, like, even this channel, I could easily do one video a day, no problem. But there's some days where it's like, look, I have to get this video out. I need to either stay up late, I need to wake up early, I need to sacrifice blank, I need to I want to watch the new episode of True Detective. Bad news, I got to do a video. I got to sacrifice what I want to do to be disciplined and to make something work. The more you water a garden, the more you take care of that garden, the more it's going to flourish. You can be hands off. You can buy all the new technology and barely ever look at the garden. Will it be as good? Will it flourish as if you were more involved and if you were more dedicated? Probably not. So, that's that. You got to make sure. Like, I don't care what kind of remote technology or whatever. Tom Brady would be getting the most out of his players. He would be demanding excellence. He would be demanding commitment to this greater goal. The goal for Mickey is to find those players who share that goal. The challenge is, how can I find all of the people who, instead of laying on their couch haphazardly watching their tablet, how am I going to find the guys and fill the roster with the guys who want to be in the facility, who want to be doing the second workout, who want to be taking care of their nutrition, who want to be doing all that stuff? How do I find those people that do that? Because getting that collective is what's going to lead you to success.
It's simple as that, right? You got to work on your craft. It's not a part-time It's not a part-time career. You got to work on your craft, and you got to be thinking about that in some way, shape, or form, 24/7.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't think the other 31 teams are doing that. What gives you, the NFL is so close. The margin for victory is so narrow. What are we doing differently? What are we doing better than everybody else? It's not just, hey, the roster's better. That didn't happen very often.
The best roster rarely wins. It's all the extra stuff that leads teams to the promised land.
It's the teams that do the things necessary to win, and there's lots of them. There's lots of things.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's not to diminish it to a quality over quantity kind of thing, but it feels like even if you're doing the film study away individually, it's a different quality of work than doing it in a group, sharing, communicating, things like that. Is my assessment of that is that accurate, or am I?
I don't think that's true. I don't think doing it in a group necessarily means it is more quality. I think you just have to find what works. If a player watching film independently is a better quality than them watching it at the facility, then let them do it independently. That's the whole point. That's the whole argument with convenience and technology and ease and whatever, is that the ease and the convenience and the whatever the factors are will ramp up productivity because it'll remove all of the problems that hinder it. So as long as the productivity, the promise of quality in productivity is up, then it doesn't matter the path that you choose to do it. That is the point. What happens is when you start sacrificing quality for ease and convenience, that's when you have to step backwards. That's when you have to say, okay, ease and convenience might not be worth it if it's sacrificing the quality and the productivity. So that's the balance. It's not a guarantee that, like this guy's talking about, that doing it a certain way will promise the level of quality. That's for the team, the players, the coaches, whoever to decide if the quality is at the highest standard.
Yeah, look, we got to get right back there who's done it. So ask him. But I think, Bobby, I see you nodding. I think you agree with me. That's
a fallacy. So this is the ultimate. There's an actual term for it, but it's like the prior generation fallacy, where the previous generation thinks that everything they did was the right way to do it, and the new generation is doing it the wrong way. It's everyone thinks how they were raised, how they grew up was the perfect time. They think they had it the hardest, or they think they had the most struggle, and they think that every other generation had it wrong in one way or the other. It's just something that happens, okay? I mean, I'm sure everyone watching this video right now is going, yep, that's actually true. I think when I grew up was better than how kids are growing up now. And I'm thinking, how could you possibly get raised with a cell phone and an iPhone? When I was raised, we were outside playing, and then the generation before me thought the same stuff, and the generation before them thought the same thing, and it just keeps going and keep going and keep going. Old doesn't mean, and I don't mean old as in like age, old as in like established. Old doesn't mean successful. There's a reason evolution happens. There's a reason technology happens. Ketchup was invented as a medicine. People used to eat Vaseline as a medicine. At one point, we thought the earth was the center of the universe, okay? Old ideals, old way of doing things isn't necessarily the right way to do it. If you want evidence of that, go look at how Arnold Schwarzenegger and some of those guys in the 80s and 70s, 60s were bodybuilding. So look at some of the nutritional advice they were handing out. All that is advanced. That's not to say that some of what was in the past wasn't good. Was it good that we were letting people have 2-a-day full contact practices and just taking unnecessary hits and unnecessary injuries and damage to their bodies and stuff like that just to do it? Just to say you had 2-a-days just because it's 2-a-days time or whatever? No, that wasn't good. Right? Obviously, there's a middle ground. The answer isn't they should all be gone. But it's definitely not, this used to happen in the past, thus it's way better. That's a huge fallacy. That's the stubborn, that's just a really, really bad way of looking at it. It's almost a guaranteed way to get stuck in the past.
There's things that you have to be committed to do. And it's not mandatory things. There's not a consequence. There's not a consequence for not doing them. But here's the thing. Look, none of it's mandatory, right? And if we do every single thing it doesn't guarantee that we're going to win. But if we don't, it kind of guarantees that you're not.
Yeah, true.
It seems like this is the NFL goal of where we're at right now. You can look when there was over half the league. I mean, it might have been right under 20 teams, whatever. With either like 7 and 8 or 8 and 7. And then you have ones that everybody looks at where the 49ers are at, and you look at the Ravens. But is that ideal? I mean, because all of the fan bases, everybody wants to win, everybody's not going to win. And it's every year at least 6, 7, 8 coaches get fired. And that's never going to change because everybody wants to win. It's demanding. But do you think that's good, the parity where everybody's hovering around 500?
You want to know why teams were hovering around 500 and there was seemingly more parity this year and all that? There's a simple answer. This year we saw more quarterbacks play than ever because of injuries and backups and whatever else. Quarterback play drives results in the current NFL. If you have a good quarterback, you will more than likely have good results. How many quarterbacks did we see go down with injury? And that leads to a bunch of average teams, a bunch of 500 teams, because backups are playing, backups to backups are playing. Some of those backups get hurt, so new quarterback now, they're rotating quarterbacks. We saw a ton of teams doing that, and those are all the teams right in the middle. All the teams right in the middle. If you went and looked, and I haven't, this is just my assumption, but I guarantee you, if you go look at the teams Bobby's talking about, the 7 and 8 group, the 8 and 8s, that whole area, how many of those, someone go do the research, how many of those teams had their starting quarterback go down or had a quarterback by committee? I would assume a lot. I would assume a whole lot. The teams at the top, tried and true. Look at the playoffs right now. AFC, what do we have? We've got the Ravens, Lamar Jackson, elite, probably the MVP. Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, elite. Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. And the Texans, your rookie of the year, CJ Stroud. Pretty easy. You look at some of the teams who are in that 7 and 8 bubble. Bengals, what happened to them? Burrow goes down, right? It's easy. NFC, same thing. Same exact thing. So that's the answer. I mean, that's why there's so much parity this year, is because of the turnover and the how many players we've seen play quarterback. There was more this year than ever.
Well, my perspective's a little different in that, look, I was in the league before free agency, existed, right? So you'd build a good roster and a good team, and then you could keep it together for a long period of time. And if you built a really good roster and you weren't losing anybody, look, you had these teams that year in and year out for a good period of time were really good. And the rest of us are trying to catch up, right? Now it's just different in that it's hard to keep an entire squad, a good roster together for more than 3 or 4 years because of free agency. I think that's a good thing. I think every year, every city and every fan base wants to have the chance to win. And I think we have that in our league, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, man, that is the answer. Like, not every team is going to win, but every team wants the chance to win. As long as you have a chance to win, as long as you believe that you can win if things fall correctly, that's all you can ask for, because every team, only one team is going to win. But what he's talking about, keeping a team together, that's all because of the quarterback. Before, you had to kind of move these contracts around. The running backs got some, wide receivers got some, quarterbacks got some. But now it's so driven by the quarterback that their contracts are so big that these 3-4 year windows are because of those contracts. I've said it once, I'll say it a million times. 2 ways to win in the NFL. MVP level quarterback or a quarterback on a rookie contract who's playing well. That's it. Those are the 2 ways. You want one of those 2 things. Once the quarterback gets paid, if you're winning with a quarterback who has a rookie contract, Seattle when Russell Wilson was there, once that quarterback gets paid, it's really difficult to keep everyone together, because all of a sudden you've got one guy demanding $200-300 million. How are you going to pay your 3 or 4 defensive all pros? How are you going to pay your all pro running back? How are you going to pay this? And you got to start making some tough decisions.
But the result of that is that you have a few teams that haven't got their roster to the point where they can win yet. You've got a few teams at the very top that are really good, and then you've got the rest of us in the middle right now fighting to be, 11-6 or 7-10. Yeah, right. So, and there's a lot of variables within that, right? I look, we're the most popular sport for a reason. That's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Kind of following up on that, can you explain just your personal philosophy or the way you look at it when you're constantly trying to be competitive every year instead of taking this and looking at like a hard reset, blow everything up, and wanting to extend that kind of competitive.
I think me and Mickey share the same philosophy where I don't believe there is a hard reset. The idea of like tanking, the idea of like blowing it up and all that. First of all, you're not guaranteed anything out of tanking, no matter how good you think the quarterback is or the first overall pick or whatever. And the players aren't going to tank. If the organization wants to tank, you can't tell a bunch of players, hey, go out there and get your ass kicked for 18 weeks. Go out there and just get dominated on national TV. These players have pride. These players are physically, like, they're not just going to go out there and lay down. So tanking is, I think, a bit of a fallacy too. What Loomis, the idea of like staying competitive is how I would run a team. You want to just put a good roster out there. You want to have players there that can win. And you're not always going to win. Like I said, the best teams, the best rosters don't always win. But you want to at least be relevant. You want to at least be moving forward and giving your fans something to root for. The teams that just flounder or don't do anything, or they're okay rolling out some average quarterback, below average quarterback year after year after year, I just don't understand it. Because it's like, there's free agency, there's a draft, there's all this stuff. Just make a move. You can make a move. And I guess that's the absent GM, absent owner. But I would much rather extended period of relevancy, peaks every once in a while. I would much rather that than good tank, good tank, good tank, good tank. Because the tanking, getting whoever, doesn't guarantee you that you're going to be successful. That upswing is never guaranteed.
I don't know if I can explain it. I just look. I look at things. Glass half full. I look at a roster and a team and say, man, if A, B, and C happen, we can be really good.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, or you have some injuries, or you get some calls that don't go your way, then it goes the other direction. And look, we can point to these last 3 seasons: 9-8, 7-10. What was the year before? 9-8. And say, man, there was 3 games there that could have easily went the other way, and now we're talking about 12-win seasons, right? And so, look, I think we've got a good roster. I do, and I think that, but we got to do some things better. I probably didn't answer the question, but all right. Thank you, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, we did it. Took us 3 videos. Man, this probably all together, it's probably well over 3 hours of watching this, reacting to it. So hopefully if you watched all 3 parts, God, go down in the comments below. Let me know you watched all 3. I mean, just let me know. Say I watched all 3 parts. And you talk about comment of the day, comment of the week type dedication. Is anybody who watched all of this. We're way over Avatar, Titanic, any of those long movies. This would absolutely be 2 VHSs in the box set. So thank you for watching. I'm going to go get some throat drop or lozenge or something. Basically just did 3 hours of radio, no ad breaks, no commercials, reacting to Mickey Loomis's press conference. This is the dedication. Man, but thank you very much. I do this because of y'all. I do this because of the engagement, the views, the comments, all that stuff. We just recently got 5,000 subscribers. So it took me 10 years to get 900 subscribers. It took me 365 days to get over 4,000. So, we're flying, ladies and gentlemen. So upwards, onwards, whatever. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.